Thank you. You were tumbling around with your Saint Bernard friends, and later in life, you were walking with your dogs a lot and observing the dogs. And I'm wondering a little bit about how being with dogs in that way has influenced your writing and how you think about it. I mean, it's a little bit in the book, right? In terms of character and in terms of place. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how dogs have changed your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think I had got my first Vizsla when I was in my 30s still, I think. And the Vizsla is a high, it's a high energy hunting dog. It needs a lot of exercise. So I was out with the dog a lot. And I guess it's just that sort of way it happened very naturally because I was out in nature and the dog has to be off leash to get the right amount of exercise. I was noticing a lot of what was around me, and I was being influenced more and more, I guess, by the natural world. And then that became something I started writing about more and more. So it kind of came into the writing. But as far as the dog influencing the writing itself, I think, I mean, for one, something you've already touched on is that a dog is a companion to what is usually a lonely or a profession that's practiced alone. And a dog can come into that space that a human being can't because they don't talk, for one. And they're usually fairly quiet and they're good companions. But I think the dog interrupts, I think for me, the dog interrupts my life in such a way with her needs to, walk 3 times a day, that it keeps things fresh and lively. And I don't get stuck like I used to. Even if I'm in the middle of writing a passage that I think, I want to just keep writing. I don't want to go out and walk the dog. Every time I go and walk the dog and come back, the writing is always made better for having done that. So I think it's sort of strangely, it doesn't seem like it is a good thing, but it is a good thing. The interruptions that they cause, I think.
That's so interesting. Well. I can imagine some people being frustrated by being interrupted, but you said in one of your passages, a dog demands attention from you in a way that doesn't feel like a demand, but more like a relief. And I can imagine that there are moments when you're so intense or when you're sort of puzzling something through that you might force yourself to keep going, but there's a kind of forgiveness in the break that you get from the dog.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it refreshes actually the break so that you come back slightly different and refreshed and come at things a bit differently.
Mm. So we talked about this a little bit as you were working on the book. Different dogs influenced different books for you, right? Like can you talk a little bit about how? Well, actually tell us about the 5 dogs. Just give us a sort of quick overview of these dogs.
Okay, there was Lisa, who was the Saint Bernard, who was there before me, who when I was born, I came into her world. And then she was followed by a dog that she died when I was 10. And then I was given my own dog, who was the opposite of her. He was a long-haired Dachshund named Timmy. And he was actually, I think, quite a difficult dog. He barked at people, he bit people a lot. He was, but I was fond of him. He was very spirited. And then that sort of took me into my adult years. And then I didn't have my first dog until my first Vizsla, who was Hazel, when I was in my 30s. And Hazel was followed by Charlotte. And Charlotte and her sister Violet lived nearby. And I had Violet for the first few months of her life to look after. So they were almost, they were 2 dogs that I was very close to. And then Charlotte has been followed by Fig, who is just 2 years old now. Yeah.
And so each of these dogs was with you when you were writing different books, right?
Yeah, except perhaps when I was young and not doing too much with Lisa, but yeah. But reading for sure.
And they were all, very different personalities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like the books that you wrote in those periods came out of those relationships in some ways?
In some ways, I think so. And also probably too, the age that I was myself, like the time in my own life that was happening. So, Hazel, I was still in my 30s, so I was still pretty young and vigorous myself. And so there was a lot of physicality with that dog and then a lot of physicality. I wrote a book called Wild Dogs, which is a very sort of physically based book that happened around that time. So I think everything was kind of mixed together. And
Mm.
I did a lot of hiking and canoeing and backwoods stuff with Hazel.
Mm.
She was,
Mhm.
yeah. And then,
So that probably was part of what influenced your nature writing, having Hazel.
yes, I think so. I think it's all sort of
Mm.
come from there, really, just the sort of accumulative time I spend in nature that
Mm.
sort of worked away at my psyche, I guess. And yeah. And then Charlotte and Violet were very much the influence for the evening chorus, because in the evening chorus I have two pointer dogs. And in that book, I really just thought, why don't I just write about things that I actually know about? And so that's why I put the dogs in there. I thought I know how those dogs work, so I'm going to put them in the book. And yeah, so they very much influenced that book.
One of the other lines from that book that I love is one of the characters says, "I like the candor of dogs. They're always honest about what they're feeling." And thinking about the way you wrote about the two dogs in that book, and the way you write about Fig and raising Fig, it seems like there's a real overlap between the way that you observe dogs and their sort of emotional candor, and also the ways that you talk about intimacy and friendship in some of your books. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just what that emotional connection is, and how that has influenced you in terms of how you think about human relationships as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I realized, when Hazel died, she lived to be like 13 and a quarter or something. And when she died, I thought, I had been living alone for a period of time there, and I had told people that I lived alone. And when Hazel died, I thought, I never lived alone. Like, I was always living with the dog. And for the first time, it really struck me how integral that relationship was, and how close a relationship it was. And, the dog comes in and they learn your world. And once they learn your world, they they know everything you know, and sometimes better than you know, because they can read all the cues. They're very good at all of that. So I think the closeness is, well, so much of it is not, you're not explaining it to one another, or you're not acknowledging it in words, but it just gets stronger and stronger over time. And so there's an enmeshment, right? And they do become your sort of best friend, because they like to do all the things you like to do, and they know when you want to do them, and they just have that way of interrupting and being your companion. That's just so, I don't know, so fantastic, really. So they're so hard to lose them, because they have hardly been with you, it feels like. I mean, Charlotte was only 9, and it just felt like we had just gotten to this great place, and then, they go. So it always makes it tough.
Yeah, they're all such individuals. And you say in the book that you don't love them equally, and that you learned that lesson from Charlotte a bit. It struck me when I read that passage how that gives you permission to be honest about emotions in a way that you couldn't be with children. You can't say that
That's
you don't
right.
love them equally.
No, that's right. But
yeah,
I think,
and you
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
There you go.
Yeah, I think I really realized that with Charlotte, who came, who immediately I had a connection with that was different than the other dog connections I had, and even some of my people connections, honestly. Like, we were just very close in a way that I couldn't even put my finger on what it was, that because our natures weren't necessarily similar, but they meshed in a way that was just, I don't know, it just worked. And also she really took care of me in a way that some of I've had to take care, like Fig is a dog I have to take care of, but Charlotte was a dog who took care of me. So there was a difference in that relationship. And it really made me realize how I did love her better than I had loved the other dogs, and also how I loved some people better, and it was just a depth of connection. It wasn't anything that you could make happen or not happen. It's just sort of there from the beginning, right? You sometimes you really connect with a creature or a person, and you can't explain why that happens, but it does, right? Undeniably, I guess.
You also connect differently with books, right? You can't always explain why a book affects you so deeply. I was thinking about this event and how there are very few there are very few things I'd like to talk about more than books, dogs, and maybe you're also an Apple aficionado, so we could talk about those too. It's such a wonderful combination. And when you're writing this book, Fig was a puppy, and you were sort of dealing with this sequestration of having a puppy and teaching the puppy about the world, and then the pandemic started soon after that, and a bunch of other people got puppies. So I think there's probably a lot of people in the audience who have had the experience of being very alone with a dog over the past few years. And you, early on in that process, you realized that you couldn't write a novel while you had a puppy, that wasn't a possibility. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that was like, and how you dealt with the fact that your practice was interrupted by this new person in your house.
Well, horrifyingly, I seem to have forgotten everything that I had experienced with other puppies. You know, it's like that when you can't remember pain, it's that same feeling maybe. So when the puppy came, I suddenly realized with horror, real horror, that I was 10 years older than I had been for the last puppy. I was almost 60. And the puppy was a whirlwind of just, you know, she was so physical and bitey and hard to manage. And I could literally do nothing. I think for the first day, I couldn't even drink a glass of water. Like, it was just impossible, even though I had a crate that that I used for her and stuff. So I couldn't do any writing. Impossible. Couldn't do any reading. I had this fantasy of puppy life where I would read through all the books that I have in this big stack that I need to get, and nothing happened like that. The only thing, but I did think, if I can't write and I can't read, maybe I could document the puppy. And so I just started, when she was in the moment, like for the few minutes she slept or was quiet, I would just sort of hammer out a few sentences and kept a kind of puppy diary through the process. And that really helped keep me sane, I think, actually, for what was a really, just such a demanding, all-encompassing thing.
And how long did that go on?
Went on for a long time. Baby Fig wasn't easy. She was pretty difficult. Like, I'd had baby Charlotte, and baby Charlotte was so easy. At 6 months, I took Charlotte on this big canoe trip where we had to walk in the darkness, and she just, stayed with me. And, at 2 years, I could never take Fig on that trip. She would just disappear or like go crazy. And, anyway, so baby Fig was difficult. And sorry, I've forgotten the original question now about the dog. But yeah, anyway, it was just hard to do anything. And Vizslas are very finely tuned, so they don't rest very easily. They're nervy, which is hard to manage with puppies. Yeah. But now she's sleeping, so it's all over now. So
can Fig go on a walk in the dark now? Has she figured that out yet?
I don't think she could, because she's a very overstimulated kind of dog. Like, I think of her, that now that I know her better, that she's a very emotional dog. She has a lot of emotions, but she gets easily overwhelmed by them. That's what happens. So something new, like walking in the dark, would be very overwhelming for her. And she would, she'd liable to take off or do something unpredictable. Whereas Charlotte she was never overwhelmed by her emotions. So it was much easier for her to be calm. But Figgy can go very quickly from, being calm to being sort of out of control, just because of the way she is.
I wonder, I know you're still in it, but I wonder how that nerviness and that emotionality has affected the way that you're writing now. Have you found yourself drawn to different subjects, or has it changed how you organize your life in any way?
Yeah, I think I'm still like, I still need to walk her 3 times a day. She still really needs a lot of exercise. So I think that's made me write in shorter bursts and actually shorter pieces because of that. So like the new book I'm working on is in short pieces, I think, kind of largely influenced by the fact that I only have these short amounts of time between the exercise quotient that has to happen every day. Yeah. So it's really, I suppose, what I'm doing is raising the dog as kind of the predominant thing, I suppose. And then the writing always has to kind of follow that in whatever's happening with the dog, rather than the other way around.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've heard so many times when established writers are talking to young writers just starting out, that it's really important to figure out a way to organize your life around your writing, and that they usually mean that in a way that's about what kind of work you choose to do, or for money, or where you live, or things like that. But we should add what kind of dog you have in the house to that
Yeah,
list. I think
definitely. Yeah, definitely. And
maybe you could start a kind of a pup finder, but for writers, where you vet the dogs to make sure they're okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, and also age of dog, like, writers, some people might like to just have an older dog right from the beginning. Puppies are something else.
Mm.
Yeah, but I know I can't do another Vizsla. Like, I know with myself, like, if I, get 10 years older, that's too, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it again. So this fig is probably my last Vizsla. Hopefully not my last dog, but that's okay. The Vizsla's they've just sort of, ripped through the center of my life in a great kind of blur. It's been great.
Mm. That's interesting. I wonder, I bet there aren't that many Vizslas who get surrendered later in life. So you probably can't find a good middle-aged Vizsla when you're ready.
No, that's right. Because they start getting really good around the age of 6. Like, that's when they start to mellow. So they're fantastic older dogs usually, but they have all that energy.
It's such an investment.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah.
But any relationship's an investment, though.
This is true. This is true. This book is so full of wisdom, in large part because of these intersections of what's happening with the dog relationships and what happens in your time alone with the book. One of the things I wanted to talk about is sort of the craft of writing, and how you came to it, and how you taught yourself to write, really, right? Like, so many people do programs and go to school for it, but you really taught yourself. And there's a passage in the book about how you began that. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that time in your life.
Yeah, I didn't go to university, even though I was supposed to go to university. I had applied and been accepted, but I went through this series of sort of misadventure. I got kicked out of regular high school, and I went to an alternative high school, and I finished early because I did well in the alternative high school. And so I went to work, and I was working through the time where I was going to go to university. And then I just decided to keep working. I was working at a car wash, and I kept thinking it was more real life. And the writers I was reading a lot of Southern American writers, actually, Faulkner and Carson McCullers. And I loved those writers. And it seemed to me the real world was the world at the car wash and not the world of the university. So I didn't go. And instead but I knew I had to try to, if I was going to be a writer, I had to practice being a writer every day to see how that worked. So I ended up going to England and living with my grandmother, who needed someone to live with her. We had this mutually beneficial arrangement. And I wrote a novel while I was there. And I worked at being a writer. And I lived in the house my father grew up in. And I spent time with my grandmother, who was kind of a misanthropic person and didn't really, anyway, we had these strange little meals in the evening, but most of the day I was free and I just did my writing. So that's sort of how I did it. And then I always just took jobs that would allow me to write, mostly manual labor jobs when I was young, but jobs I could just do and leave and never take home with me. And some jobs where I could write on the job. Like, I did a lot of gas station pumping gas when that was a thing, because you have that little gas booth, and I could write in there or read a book, and it was kind of a great job for that. Yeah.
And tell us about sort of, there's a passage in the book that's about the library where you sort of began your education in terms of writing.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yes, because I thought that what a writer needed was to read. So I was going to just go into the library and I was going to read from A to Z. I just very methodically start in the literature section and read from A to Z. So I did. I read pretty solidly from A to M, but then I skipped ahead to W so I could read Virginia Woolf. And so I have, like, anytime anybody asks me or I have to give some reference to writers, I can always do it from the first half of the alphabet, but really the second half of the alphabet I'm not so well versed in, because I did that skipping ahead thing. But it was a pretty good system, actually, all things considered, just to read. And so
Yeah, it's an important piece of it. And Wolf, actually, it's great that you mentioned her, because she's a piece of this book as well, and is a great way to introduce one of the things about the book that is sort of the most magical, which is that we don't just get to meet your dogs, we also get to meet the dogs of other writers. Tell us about some of the other dogs who are in the book, and why you chose to include them.
Yeah, it was really fun doing that research for, who to include. And I ended up including a lot of dogs that we would consider to be difficult dogs. But I was really intrigued by that relationship. Like Thomas Hardy had a dog called Wessex, who was a fox terrier, and Wessex would be considered a difficult dog. Wessex didn't like discipline of any sort, and he liked to walk on the dining table when guests were over for dinner and just help himself to whatever was on their plate, and he would bite them if they tried to object. And he was addicted to a radio program called the Children's Hour, and so Thomas Hardy bought him his own radio, and if they were out anywhere and it was time for the program, Wessex would make a fuss. They'd have to drive home, and Wessex would just sit in front of the radio for an hour and listen to his program. So it kind of fascinated me, these stories. And James Thurber had a childhood dog called Muggs, who was also similarly really cantankerous and bit lots of people, and he would bite so many people, and the mother of the family would send everybody who he bit a box of chocolates at Christmas. That there was upwards, I think, of 40 or 50 boxes of chocolates being sent out every Christmas to all these people that he had bitten. So it kind of intrigued me to think, what is it about the difficult dog that is it sort of stir the writer somehow? Like does it stir the imagination? Is it this kind of what I was saying earlier about being interrupted? Does it do a similar thing in having to kind of fit yourself around a dog's personality, right? It's something that keeps you fresh and keeps you flexible, I guess. And yeah, so it was really, those stories were really fun to research and do, and find the little photos that accompanied them. So it was great.
Yeah, there's a real, I'm thinking about when we read writers and we think, every now and then you run into a writer who doesn't seem to be as sympathetic to their own characters, or to sort of forgive them their humanness. And it sounds, the way you're talking about these difficult dogs, that many of the writers you're describing are writers who are very accepting of their characters as they are, and that they write really complicated, fallible, troubled characters even. So we have to wonder, if we read back through thinking about Wessex, what Thomas Hardy was up to with his characters.
Yeah, that's right. And Thomas Hardy carved, when Wessex died, he carved the tombstone himself for Wessex out of stone. He did all of that carving. Like, I always think that's, something that's a measure of love, isn't it, to do that for such a difficult dog.
Yeah. You wonder who carved Thomas Hardy's tombstone.
Yeah, me too.
One of the other passages, when you're writing about Zora Neale Hurston's dogs, you talk a little bit about dogs and jobs, which seems so apt for the dogs of writers, sort of to think about what kind of jobs they get to have. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about her and her dogs, and dogs and jobs, and people in jobs, sort of what those are.
Yeah, well, I think what I really liked about what she said about her dogs was that she had observed their personalities for so long and so well that she could sort of decide on their likes and things they were good at, what they would be suited for, and whether they would be an overseer or more, more somebody who did things, more of a functionary, I guess. So it's yeah, I think when you know a dog so well, you can, if they figure out if they were human, what would they be good at? Like, I think Figgy, who's very, has her kind of, is not hyper vigilance, but her big emotions, and she'd be a very good observer of something. Like, she would be probably a very good detective, or she's good at noticing things. If something's out of alignment or different one day to the next, she'll notice it. She's very curious. Any bag that you open, she shoves her head right in and looks around like if somebody comes to visit, she goes right into their suitcase, right, and has a look around. So yeah, so I like that idea of thinking like that. Like,
what their job would be. It sounds to me
Mm.
like Fig is a writer, honestly, sticking her head
Yeah.
in bags where she's kind of.
Maybe, but I don't think she has the concentration for it.
It makes me want.
So,
It makes me wonder, when you think about your characters, or when you think about these writers, or when you think about yourself, what kind of dog you would be. Do you ever wonder?
what kind of dog I would be? I wouldn't be a Vizsla. I don't think. I don't think I have that. I mean, I'm more likely to be a Saint Bernard, I think,
That's
actually.
interesting. Hmm.
Yeah.
You come by that naturally.
Yeah, that's right.
I wonder if you want to read a little bit from the book.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll just read a little bit from near the beginning, and I think probably it doesn't need much explanation. Just as picking a title for a book is either easy, in that it occurs right away, sometimes before the book has even been started, or impossible, meaning that no title seems right ever, so it is for the naming of a dog. Hazel was decided before the puppy was brought home. The color that is hazel is roughly the shade of a Vizsla's coat and eyes. Also at the time, it felt unique, not being a popular name for either human or canine. Those were the reasons we picked it for the puppy, and it always seemed right, although children had trouble with it, and Hazel was sometimes called Weasel by anyone under the age of 10. Charlotte was one of dozens of names that I tried out on the new puppy in the weeks after she was living with me. Before she was Charlotte, she was Rosie, Wallace, Harris, and a dozen other names that I can no longer remember. I settled on Charlotte because it seemed a vaguely aristocratic name, and the puppy had a rather imperious quality to her. This time, I want a name that isn't a human name at all, but is a piece of nature. I have tried and discarded various trees, ash, maple, rowan, larch. For a while, I was thinking of cricket and then clover, but both names are hard to yell, feel too much of a mouthful for the countless times I will be trying to call the dog away from rolling ecstatically in the guts of a dead fish, or eating fresh, steaming piles of horse shit, or swimming out into the middle of the lake after ducks. In the end, I'm not the one who thinks of the name. My stepdaughter, in a moment of clairvoyance, texts that she wants the dog to be born on her birthday, which it nearly was, and proclaims that it should be called Fig. I like the name for its clarity and for how easy it is to say emphatically, and also for the possibility of using it in different ways. Figgy, Figlet. I amuse myself by making up lots of nicknames for my dogs. In the last year of her life, I hardly ever called Charlotte by her real name, but instead was calling her mostly Joe or Fred. I had tired of her original name, and it didn't really matter what I called her because she and I understood one another without words. So Fig seems good, right? Also, the Vizsla, with its dark red fur, somewhat resembles the color of a ripe Kalamurner fig. Charlotte has been dead for 5 months, and I miss her constantly. The months of being without a dog have been hard. The house has been so empty, walking has felt pointless. So I am anxious to fill my life and my home with a new dog. I'll stop there.
I love that passage. I love the way you move between the dogs in your life. There's not sort of one section for a given dog. They pop up in every part of the book. Do you find yourself thinking about all of them all the time?
Yeah, there is kind of, I think in the book somewhere I say about there being a continuum of dog, and that's sort of how it feels, this continuum of dogs. So I do think about them. They kind of blur into one another, or I'll remember something Charlotte did, or sometimes there's a weird overlap that happens where one dog, like Fig now, we're walking in a place where I had walked before with Charlotte, and I can remember walking there with the previous dog. It's this strange little overlap of time that happens, but it's nice actually.
There's a continuity to it that's also disrupted enough by individual personality in a way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's interesting. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of the early days of being with a puppy and the life of a writer. And for a lot of people in the audience, the past few years, they all share a kind of solitude and loneliness. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how writing has helped you through that over time, and how puppies have helped you through that over time. Just sort of what the relationship between the writer or the artist and solitude might be.
Yeah, I've always had a hard time with the solitude part of writing, because you know, starting when I went to England, I was like 20 years old. And most of my friends, well, all of my friends actually were just either in university or doing things where they were around other people who were 20 years old. And I was spending my time completely alone. And then in the evenings, just having dinner with someone in their late 70s who didn't even actually really want to talk to me. And so right from that beginning, I think I've always come up against the loneliness of writing, and it's been hard on me. I think actually, I think psychically it's been hard on me. I like people. I'm quite a social person, and I like to be around them. So to have to do something that requires me to be sequestered away from them is has always been tough. So I think for me, the dog has really, really helped that, because while I still have that kind of loneliness in a way that writers and artists have, because you're just doing something alone, and I now have somebody that can actually come with me into that place, and it really it helps a lot. I don't know if I would have been able to stick it out without the dogs, actually, because it's hard. I remember when my brother was dying, he said it's like going in towards a place, leaving people in one room and going into another room where you have to go by yourself into that room. But he said, but I'm used to doing that because I play the piano. That's what I've always done, right? And I thought, yeah, like that's sort of what it's like. It is, creating is leaving that room full of happy, laughing people and going into this empty, quiet room by yourself, away, where you're just supposed to be inside your own head. So yeah, so I think the dog saved me from really having to suffer the effects of that over a lifetime.
In fact, I think there might be a passage in the book where you say very plainly that Charlotte saved your life.
Yeah, Charlotte saved me for sure. She did. At the time I got Charlotte, my brother had died, and my Hazel had died in the same week, actually, and I had a breakup. I kind of lost the house where I was living. One close friend died, and another was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And this was all within a 6-month period. So I moved into this kind of rental house that I ended up buying. But at the time I moved in, I had nothing really with me, just a kind of mattress and a few things for the kitchen. And I had the puppy Charlotte, who was, I don't know how old she was then, pretty young. And then we just lived like that. But she liked to sleep. She liked to sleep on me with her heart against my heart. I guess that must have been how she slept with her mother. And so the hearts beat together on top of one another. And I think human babies do that sometimes too. And so she would sleep with me like that every night. And really, I think that restored me, that just that act and her presence, and having suffered all those things in this really short period of time, she helped me. I don't know that I could have done it without her, actually. So yeah, she was great.
She was an amazing dog. It's true.
She was an amazing dog.
And the book, as much as it's about dogs, it's also about writing, and it's organized in an interesting way. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to that organization and what you hoped to do with it, and how you want the book to work on the reader?
Yeah, I organized it by dividing the sections into parts of the writing process. So it begins with beginnings. There's a part on process, there's character, there's setting. And I wanted to even sort of move through the dogs, but also focus in on these individual sections on those specific subjects and how the dog has an influence on them. Like the section on character is really a lot about how you learn who the dog is. Learning, paying that close attention to character on the puppy is a really good way to think about how to deal with character when you're putting it on the page. Like one of the things that I learned from the dogs is that there can always be an anomaly in a character. So, a dog can be a brave dog, and they can be afraid of one thing, right? So like when you're creating a character can always stand to have one anomaly. You can make something that doesn't seem to fit with them, but it's a truism, I think, and that actually, but I learned that from dogs. So I guess I want the book to be, for something for everybody. I guess if you're interested in writing, hopefully there's something that you can learn about writing or writing and having dogs. If you just interested in the dogs themselves, you could, ignore the writing part really, or sort of it's not going to play as large a part for it. But I just, this is sort of, it's really my life kind of put into book form, because these are all the elements of my life. And so I wanted to put them all in one place, and hopefully that they speak to people in different ways, or whatever they're interested in learning.
Yeah, it's a wonderful aspect of this book, and it's a rare thing that you can find a book that can appeal to such a broad range of people and introduce them to subjects in such a short span. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about how dogs taught you, and I love what you just said about learning about character. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about writers you've learned from, or books that you've learned from about writing, or about dogs, I guess, either if you want. But certainly about writing. Is there anything you'd recommend that you felt has been particularly influential in your development as a writer?
And these would be books on craft?
Could be books on craft. They could be novels that you felt taught you particularly well about a particular aspect of being a writer, or a particular craft element.
Yeah. Well, I read a lot of poetry, and I still read a lot of poetry, and I think poetry is a really good place to go for writing, because it really teaches you how to be succinct. And also the rhythms and the language, and that idea of using just a brief amount of language to say something, usually that has a lot of emotional freight to it. So I think poetry is my first writing teacher, for sure. I think that was the first thing that I read and really loved reading and kept reading. And of course, poets from the front of the alphabet, like Auden, Dickinson, right? Luckily, a lot of them are from the good ones, the ones that I liked are from the front of the alphabet. So I think I continue to read poetry. I continue to learn from poetry and how people do things. And I think reading itself is always the best. Reading other writers is always the best teacher. But there are a couple of craft books, then they're old ones, but I think they're still good. They still work, I think, and I still get my students to look through them, or I use pieces for my students. And one is Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott, which is tied, it's a really good book. It's still relevant. And the other is the Annie Dillard book called The Writing Life, which I think the thing about that book that still really resonates is the imaginative component of it, like how she gives permission to be sort of as imaginative and wild and physical. Like it's a very visceral book, I think, and I think those are both really great books. And as far as dog books, the couple of dog books that I have liked in the last decade, Afterglow, Eileen Miles' book about taking care of her dog at the end of life, it's fantastic, and Mark Doty's Dog Years, which is also a book I have really liked. So about dogs helping him through grief. So those are, yeah. Now
I know, because I've read your books, that you don't just love dogs, you also love other animals. So I wonder if maybe we should bring a little bit of them in, and talk a little bit about just nature writing generally. And for example, the evening chorus was about a birder, among other things. And your inhabiting of nature as a place of sort of teeming life. There's so much happening in your books when you write about nature. I wonder if you weren't writing about dogs, what other animal would you choose?
That's a great question. I might choose birds, because I find birds so interesting. And what I like too about birds is, some of them leave, especially, where I live, and then they return again. And that leaving and that return are sort of these really joyful events. So I think and also birds they're such delicate things, and they do so much, the singing and where I live in this row house, and there's sort of 5 of us in a row. And every year the same robin comes. She's come for 7 years, and she decides which porch she's going to build her nest on. And it's this big decision, and we're all invested, like we're all out there trying to entice her onto our porch. and she builds her nest on one of our porches and has her, has her usually 2 sets of fledglings and then goes off again. But it's this enormous event, and it's 5 households are invested in this robin, this one robin. So I think, there's just so much. There's just so much with birds, and they live quite close to humans, and so there's an interaction. Like last year, this robin, I'm sorry to go on about the robin, but honestly, I'm kind of obsessed with her. But last year, I was trying to chase, the robin had her babies, and there was a squirrel, and I was trying to chase the squirrel off the porch because get her away from going near the nest. And I'd kind of lurch out my door, the squirrel would run down the path, and then she'd return again. And after the robin watched me do that a few times, it's like she thought, okay, I'm going to show you how to chase the squirrel, because obviously you can't do it. So she came down from her nest and she dive bombed the squirrel, and she drove it like down the path under a parked car, and went right under the parked car after it. And then she came back, the squirrel didn't return. And then she just kind of looked at me like, that's how you do it. So there's all this kind of interaction that happens with the wild birds that is kind of fantastic, I think. So I think birds would be my next choice. Maybe even just this particular robin who I am obsessed with.
Yeah, that robin sounds like quite a character.
She's so
I think
feisty.
we may be seeing more dispatch. Yeah. It's amazing. I wonder, in terms of other books about animals, are there other touchstones for you, or nature writing?
Yeah, I liked Barry Lopez did a really great book about wolves that I really liked. I like Barry Lopez. And I like in the UK, Melissa Harrison. Yep. And I read a lot. Now, of course, I'm having trouble thinking of them. But I read a lot of nature books, and I like the ones that tend to, Roger Deacon, also UK. I like what I like are if I can find books where the author has sort of gotten out of the way of the subject, like they take themselves back so that you're really seeing what they're seeing and they're not talking about themselves as much, because there are sometimes a tendency for people just to talk about their own things and you can't actually see the bird they're trying to look at. So I'm more of that. I like those books where you can actually see the thing they're talking about. But I read a lot of different ones all the time, so it's hard to kind of think of somebody specific actually in this moment. Because also I get amnesia about that. Everybody asks me about books and then I can't remember anything. But
An occupational hazard. You're okay.
Yeah.
I wonder. I have 2 more questions before we go. I wonder about Fig, and you've been together for 2 years now, and I wonder, sort of based on what you sort of understood about Fig in the early days and what you understand about Fig now, how you would say you've adapted to each other, and what Fig specifically has taught you in these past couple of years.
Yeah, Figgy's I think I did a good thing. I think I did something right with Fig, in that I figured out she had that personality where she was easily overwhelmed, and I gave her a very strict routine, and we have a very strict routine. We do the same things every day in terms of her walking and stuff, and I think that's really benefited her and made her feel she's quite a confident and secure dog. But she's full of she pushes everything to its limit, like the way she disappears into, I opened the spice cupboard one day and she just flew into it as though it was a portal to another universe. She jumped out of my car, a thing no dog has ever done, but she was connected to a harness because she had to have a harness because she moved around so much. And so she just dangled on the outside of the car, totally fine. But but when I looked back, when I was driving and she wasn't in the back seat, anyway, it's a crazy moment. But she does things like that. She let herself out of a tent when I was camping. She undid the zipper and disappeared in the night, and I heard her galloping through the forest, out there. So I think Figgy has really taught me to enjoy life to its utmost. Like she enjoys every day to its utmost. Like she explores everything. She just does what she can. She's really joyful, and that's that's a thing that I have really benefited from. I think it's just her, especially in these last couple of years with the pandemic, right? being around her kind of spirit, her level of enjoyment in life has been fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, those stories you're telling about her. She, you say that she's overwhelmed and that she's emotionally sort of high strung, but she seems undaunted. I mean, she's running out into the nighttime to explore. It's brave.
She's not afraid. She is not afraid of anything, and she has a very kind of curious nature, right? She wants to see. Like, she jumped out of the car because she just wanted to get to something. I guess it was out the window, or see what it was like. And the funny thing is, when she jumped out of the car, she didn't even make a sound. I looked back and I couldn't see her, and then I just saw her head kind of popping up by the window because she was trying to figure out how to get back in, but she wasn't crying or making a sound, right? It was she's just doing it on her own. So yeah, she's not afraid. She's not afraid of anything, actually, which is a great thing with her. She has no fears.
That's lucky.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Well, but they often have some weird little fear. Like Charlotte had a fear of the smoke alarm beep, which would drive her out of a house. If it went off, I'd have to take her home. She couldn't stand to be there anymore.
Wow.
So these strange little fears that happen, right? And Hazel had a fear of the sound of anything that sounded like a gun, which expanded to include everything at the end, like twig snapping, a car door slamming. Wow. So yeah, but anyway, Figgy doesn't have a fear. So
well, I hope she hangs on to that bravery. You have confessed that you're attached to Vishla's, and you said that you won't have another one probably. So what would be your second choice?
Well, probably something smaller, because she's 50. They're 50 pounds, and it's 50 pounds of muscle, and she can almost pull me over. And so I think, I don't know. I've always liked bull terriers, actually. So I think bull terrier might be my second choice. Yeah.
That's great. I don't know how much more time we have. I guess Zach will come on and tell us. But is there anything I know that you're teaching right now, and being self-taught. I wonder what you when your students ask you for advice, what do you reach for? What is the best sort of writing advice that you feel like you give?
I think the best writing advice I give is to not be hard on yourself, not be critical of yourself, and not censor yourself. And that's the thing that everybody does, and young writers, new writers do it all the time. This isn't good enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. So I just try to say, take away that voice. Just do something, and do something else. Like, just try to remove the judgmental factor from it, because that's the worst thing, I think, with writing at any stage, is just feeling your own inadequacies. But they're not usually inadequacies. It's just your own fears around it. So
and practically speaking, how do you do that?
Well, you write until you feel the judgmental voice, and then you stop. So you work on something, and as soon as that voice comes in and tells you this is bad, this is good, you should do this, you just stop working on that thing, put it aside, come back to it another time. You can't, like, the moment you have that judgmental voice comes, you're no longer in the flow. You're no longer actually in the engagement. You've removed yourself, and you've taken yourself out of it. So you need to stop. So that's what I do. Tell them to do.
That's really interesting. That it sounds strikingly like a form of conditioning, like a dog training exercise, in a way that you don't get to do the thing you love if you're doing something naughty.
Yes, that's right. Yes, no biscuits for you if you start thinking that you're terrible or something. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And what in all of this process and all of this exploration that you do with writing, what part do you feel like you enjoy the most? Where's the joy in it for you?
I think the joy is when I'm working out an idea, when I'm just beginning something, and I'm following an idea, I don't really know where it's going, and I'm sort of in that process place. I think that's my favorite part. And I'm not doing any of that judgmental, critical thinking about something, but I'm just following where something's going, and there's energy around it, and I'm following the energy. I love that part.
So do you feel like it's in some ways outside of yourself, that you're not always consciously creating it, that you're sort of digging in.
Yeah, following it, I think. It feels
Yeah.
like I'm following something that's not me, not ego driven anyway. Yeah, just like following the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
You're walking through the process, and like you're walking through the forest. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Jenna. Those are great
wonderful.
questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for doing this and for being here. This is an absolutely wonderful conversation. Jenna said something earlier that was, I think, there are few things that she'd rather do than talk about dogs and talk about books. And I completely agree. It's just the two of my favorite things in the world. The book is And a Dog Called Fig. We do again have signed book plates at Book Passage. So if you buy it from us, you can get a signed copy. We really hope you do. And we hope you come back for our next event. And thank you both so much for having been here and for doing this. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Zach.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. Bye, everyone.